All right, well, thank you so much for being here, everyone, for our very first workshop with Ted Hogeman on sound effects and sound design. Ted is a production sound mixer and filmmaker based in DC, and he's done the sound design for multiple films, some of which have screened at the GFF before, and he just finished his first full-length feature film. If you have any questions for Ted throughout the presentation, you can send them in the chat. We'll also have time at the end for a Q&A. So take it away, Ted.
So welcome to Did You Hear That? A guide to sound effects and design. So to start, I want to play a little game where I'm going to play sound effects, and I'm going to ask you to see if you can identify the movie they're from and or what the sound effect is. Some of them are from specific movies. Some of them are just more general sound effects. So mystery sound 1. All right, can anyone identify that sound effect?
Jurassic Park.
Good guess. No, it's not Jurassic Park.
That's a TIE fighter.
That is the TIE fighter from Star Wars. All right, mystery sound 2. Anybody have any ideas what movie that is from?
That's definitely Star Wars.
It is not Star Wars.
Are you sure it's not the TIE fighter sound effect?
I'm sure. Any other guesses?
That was Jurassic Park.
That was Jurassic Park. That is the T-Rex from Jurassic Park. Mystery sound 3. Any guesses as to this sound?
Wilhelm scream.
That is the Wilhelm scream. Good pull. So this is a classic scream. I think it originally was from a Western of a guy getting shot in the leg with an arrow, but sound designers have fallen in love with this sound, and it shows up in movies constantly. Most famously, it's in Star Wars and Indiana Jones. But if you listen for it, you'll start hearing it everywhere. Mystery sound 4. So this is a more general sound, but can you identify what it is?
That's the front doors of the media center when it opens up.
Pretty close. Yeah, this is a generic metal door sound that again has found its way into hundreds of video games and movies. It's like a classic one that I know. I first heard it in the video game Deus Ex, but you hear it in movies and games a lot. Mystery sound 5. Any guesses as to this sound? Any guesses?
Sounds like Ted out on safari.
Well, Chris, what time do you think the sound takes place at?
Rainforest Cafe, that's funny.
Right. Wait, I need to pull the chat.
Yeah, people are answering it in the chat, Ted.
Let's see. Somehow after a year of this, I'm still not super up to snuff on my Zoom. There we go. Yes, nighttime crickets. Chris Corcalo, apologies if I butcher your name. Yeah, so this sound is basically just ambience for night. So you have crickets, you have a little bit of bird call. I think there's a moose in the background, but this is an ambient track just to represent night. Mystery sound 6. Any guesses as to this sound? Slasher, good guess. There's actually a specific character that this is associated with. Mortal Kombat's another good guess, but not quite.
Kill Bill.
Not Kill Bill. I think you definitely have the blades. Sorry, what was that?
Is it Jason?
Not Jason.
Mm.
Wait, could you do it again, please?
Yep.
Michael Myers.
Not Michael Myers. This is actually the sound of Wolverine's claws. Wolverine from the X-Men coming out and going back in. And then finally, our last one, Mystery Sound 7. So does anybody recognize that sound?
Oh man, that is definitely an iconic sound, but I can't place it. I don't know where it first appeared.
It's a cliffhanger from Steven. Sounds like a groundhog. Yep. Yeah. So this is the sound that goes under Dramatic Chipmunk, that an old viral video. It originally comes from Young Frankenstein, but it's basically just a like string crescendo that plays. So the reason I played each of those different mystery sounds is because those represent the 5 basic types of sound. I will say these are my definitions that I have come up with in doing sound design for several years. So take my definitions with a grain of salt. But our basic 5 types of sound effects are dialogue. So mainly people think of lines of dialogue, the actual lines written in the script, but it also includes breaths, shouts, anything the characters on screen are saying. Then we have our sound effects, which are the design sounds. These are our big sounds with impact. When most people think of sound design, I think this is what they think of. So things like the TIE fighter or the T-Rex roar, I would qualify as sound effects, where you're really thinking about what it should sound like and designing it. But then we also have Foley. So Foley, it's a little bit tricky because some people have a very specific definition of what Foley is. Hardcore Foley artists will say that the only true Foley is what is recorded by an artist while watching what's on the screen. My definition is a little bit more loose. It's all the little things we don't think about as sound. We don't necessarily think about as sound design. So footsteps, clothing rustle, doorknobs, doors opening and closing, sort of every little thing that makes a sound on screen, but you don't necessarily think about as sound design. The little subtle noises. Then we have ambience, which are sort of longer tracks to sort of build the world of sound around our characters in a scene. So these are good because they sort of place us in an immediate like time and space and place. And finally, we have stingers. So these are not quite music or score. They're not realistic sounds that the characters are hearing in the scene, but they are non-diegetic sounds to highlight aspects of a scene, to give just like a little bit of extra oomph. Okay. So that's an example of a stinger. So like the classic one is a villain revealing themselves. It was me all along. Any questions about the different types of sound effects? Or any of these? I will say, so one reason I like to break the sound effects up like that is because it's really useful for organizing your editing project. And so I also personally, I find it really satisfying to color code each of the sound effects. So I make my dialogue one color, I make my sound effects another color, I make my Foley one color. And that way, when I'm working on building sort of the sound world of a film, I can sort of figure out what ingredient the whole thing needs. So if it needs a little bit more Foley, I can quickly go to my Foley tracks and see what needs to be tweaked. If I need to work on one of those bigger design sounds, I'll go to my sound effects track. It also helps to separate them into folders in Adobe Premiere or your editing program of choice, just as a way to quickly find what it is that you need to add to get your scene to work.
Color coding is a nice touch. That looks really nice on a timeline.
Yeah. It also helps if you're handing it off to somebody else to have those things separated. It helps them to collaborate with you, I find. All right. One of the biggest sort of secrets to sound design is that sound is emotional. Like sound should cause a feeling in your audience. And so with that in mind, I want to play 2 different sound effects and ask you how it makes you feel. So this is sound 1. This is sound 2. So how does the first sound make you feel? This one, our TIE fighter here. Anxious, yeah. Startled. Can anyone say like why it sounds makes you feel more anxious?
Threatening is a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. Got a wailing quality. Yep. And there's a specific reason for that we'll talk about in a little bit. Now let's listen to sound 2 again. How does this sound make you feel? Or what is it? What qualities could you say this sound has?
Yeah, definitely doesn't have as much distortion in it.
Yeah, grating and powerful. That's a good one. Yep, not as much distortion. Yeah, the electronic aspect. Yep, it's got sort of, it sounds more mechanical. I know for me, go ahead.
Maybe it's a slightly more familiar sound as well.
Yeah, that's what I was actually just about to say, is the X-Wing, to me at least, sounds much more like a machine. The TIE fighter sounds almost like an animal, and the X-Wing sounds more like a machine. So it's a machine, which we expect it to be, so it's kind of comforting. Whereas the TIE fighter sounds more like a creature or a threat. It sounds like something screaming at you. It's scarier. Sound is a really quick way to tell us a lot about what the characters on screen are going through. And the sounds we associate with a character can tell us a lot about what their emotional state is at the moment. So in that spirit, I've got a couple clips of Wolverine from X-Men. And I just want to play these 2 and see how we can tell a little bit about the emotional state of the characters from a single sound effect. Versus so in that first scene, we can tell that the character is startled because that sound is really fast. It's just a quick shing. In the second clip, it's a little bit more frightening and scary. You get the sense that maybe something big is about to go down because it's this slow, threatening sound. We also have a lot more of the sound of it sort of cutting through his own skin in our second clip to make it more of a scary sound effect. So when you are designing sounds for a movie, I think it's really important to think about, like, how is it going to make you feel? Is it something scary? Is it gross? Does it make you calm? Does it make you anxious? Is it familiar? Is it unfamiliar? And with that in mind, let's look at some longer clips from movies. So this is from the 2013 short Lights Out by Pony Smasher, aka David Sandberg, who's a great horror filmmaker on YouTube. right, so what are some of the sounds that we heard in that clip? Lots of creaking and squeaking. Yep. The light switch. But what starts off the clip? Yep. Good singer at the end. Yeah. Yes. The rain. Yeah. Because the rain and the door opening, it's like it's sort of a couple things just sort of immediately set the scene. That rain sort of sets it up as like a creepy, rainy night. That sort of immediately sets a spooky tone. And it's all just through like a little bit through the visual, but mainly through the sound. It builds this sound bed that carries through the whole thing. The other thing is there's the stinger at the end, and then there's a really low bump that comes in as things start to get creepy. I think this will try that over Zoom. So right there, you can start to hear a little low tone begin playing. All right, next clip. Yep, yeah. Yeah, and he does a really good job with getting a nice punchy sound for that light switch. Because this is, I think, something to also think about is even seemingly little actions, if they're important to your plot, should have that extra punch. Because like sound is a great way to sort of highlight specific actions in order to better tell your story. So this is a clip from the feature film Kringle Time, which I and several other alumni, including Chris Morrillis, who's on this call, worked on a few years ago. Here we go.
Hey, Jerry.
Yeah.
Mayor Jorkins.
Yes, sir. We've met.
All right, so what are some sounds that you heard in that clip? The creepy sitar, yep. Yep, the little whoosh as sort of our ghost sort of fades away and our new character comes in. What about when our haunted snowman is on screen? Yep, the bathroom door is a little bit of Foley. So what about right here? Let me go back a little bit further. Yeah, the breathing. So one of the things when doing this scene is I wanted to make sure that you had a hint of the sort of ghostly snowman before you saw him. So right before we actually cut to the snowman, we hear a little bit of his sort of creepy breaths right before we cut to that shot. But under the snowman, there's also the sound of breaking ice and dripping water. And that is in part because I was trying to work on, since it's a ghostly snowman, it's a snowman who's sort of representing death and decay. So what would that mean for a snowman versus a human? It would mean the sound of melting, AKA dripping.
Hey, Jerry.
Yeah.
Mayor Jorkins.
And so the idea is that we want to make sure that the sounds that we pick for our elements say something about the characters themselves in the scene.
I love that you came up with the whole symbol of death, and how that would be represented, or what that would mean for a snowman. Was that something you came up with, or did you get a note from the director about that? Because I mean, that's pretty good.
That's something that I think the director and I talked about. Like, being a sound designer, a big part of it is collaborating with other people. I think I came up with the dripping, but then I also like ran that by the director, and then he wanted more of the like ice and wind for any time the ghost snowman was on screen. This is from a short film called Drip. All right, so what are some of the sounds we heard there? Oozing, yep. Any others? Felt gross, good, yes. Discordant tones, yep. The doorknob thumping, yeah, good. So Chloe, why did it feel gross?
I would say like that oozing sound, like at first it was like building up, and then like you started to like hear it and it got louder and louder, and it just like, I don't know what it was. It just felt unsettling.
Yeah, and that's exactly the feel I was going for with this scene. It's actually, so the way that I made that sound was taking 2 raw chicken patties and just rubbing them together with the microphone really close. And I don't think I did any processing to that. It came out really well just recording that in my kitchen. But it's a good example of like, I wanted to sort of sell the idea of this slimy creature on the other side of the door. And then there's also a stinger right when the creature passes over the doorknob and twists the doorknob to just highlight that moment.
Then you,
Sorry, still a little clumsy with Keynote. Sorry, Chris, what were you going to say?
no, I mean, there's also quite a bit of other sounds going on too. Like there's like pulsing sounds and risers, and just just there seems to be a whole bed of tones that you put in there as well.
Yeah, that's one, because I mean, I like to think, like, I think sound design and score sort of go hand in hand. It's good when you can collaborate with the composer, although a lot of times that work is done separately. But I would encourage people to play around with those non-diegetic sounds when it comes to their sound design. So I think it's a really good way to build that feeling that you want your audience to feel, in addition to like the actual sounds of the objects on screen. So a note on realism. I know my first instinct when I started doing sound design was to try to make things sound real. Just, oh, okay, I need the sound of a door closing. I'm gonna go get an act like the actual door closest to me. But sound design actually isn't really about realism. Spaceships don't make sounds in space, it's a vacuum. Knives don't make that sharpening sound when you swing them through the air. Prairie dogs don't come with dramatic string quartets. But sometimes in movies, they do. Because, and this is the one rule, if you take away just one thing from this workshop, I want you to take away this rule. It's not always about what sounds real. It's sometimes more about what feels right. So sometimes the most realistic sound isn't the best sound to use for your sound design. Sometimes you need to come up with something else. And with that in mind, I want to show this clip from this TED Talk, The Beautiful Lies of Sound Design.
I'm going to play 3 videos of a rainy day, but I've replaced the audio of one of the videos, and instead of the sound of rain, I've added the sound of bacon frying. So I want you to think carefully which one the clip with the bacon is. All right. So actually, I lied. They're all bacon.
So in that case, getting an actual like microphone up close to a pan of bacon with the oil boiling was a much better sound effect for the rain than just going out and recording rain on pavement. And so that's just one example of how a totally different sound can act as a representative of something else in your movie. Because fundamentally, you're not there to sort of make the most realistic choices. You're there to sort of get the movie to feel right. Sound is emotional. Now let's talk about how we get those sounds to feel right. One of the first things I would say is when you're doing sound design, don't just grab sort of single sound effects that you find or make. What you can do is instead layer your sounds, much like an onion sound has layers. And because I think it's unlikely that you're going to find like sort of the perfect sound effect for your thing. Sometimes you will, sometimes you get lucky, but a lot of times you have to build your sound effect in order to get it to feel right. The other thing is that if you are using sound from sound effects libraries, you might be using a sound that a bunch of other people have already used. And so one way to make your sound unique is to combine it with another sound effect. And finally, animal sounds are always a fun thing to include. If you're feeling stuck and it's just not feeling right, try figuring out if there's some way you can mix an animal, even if it has nothing to do with an animal, even if it's the sound of like a hammer going on pavement. Try mixing in a tiger growl or just some animal that could add to the elements of sound design. The classic one is in the Fast and Furious movies, almost all the times that you hear car engines, there's tiger roars and lion growls and big cat sounds mixed in with the engines of the Fast and the Furious movies. But here's an example of some basic sound layering. So this is a recreation of that Wolverine claw sound. So that's all the sounds. This is actually just made up of 3 separate sounds. I've got a knife being scraped on stone, a knife being sharpened, and the sound of cutting meat. And by mixing sort of each of the volumes of each of those, I can emphasize different aspects of it. So if I want to emphasize the fact that it's a painful process, I would raise the volume of the cutting. If I want it to sound more like an action scene's about to kick off, I would definitely play more of the blade sounds. But all 3 of them together are what create the sound effect. So here's another example from Kringle Time of some layered sound.
This is the editing bays right here. Hey, fellas, how we doing?
Pleasant nightmares.
Okay.
All right, so what are some of the sounds we heard in this clip? Particularly when it sort of goes into time lapse and things are moving super quickly. Sound of a crowd, yep. Yeah, there's a few footsteps in there. Yep, the radio and the music, yeah. And whooshes. Yeah, whooshes are a big one. Yes, and so I want to talk about that specifics, that notice the sweeping sound. So
This is the editing bays right.
So one of the things that is awesome with sound design is your brain wants to connect the sound you're hearing to the images you see on screen. And so if you can just sort of get into that sweet spot, for me at least, it feels like a click where just everything sort of falls into place. And so in this scene with the people whooshing around, there's a general bed of the sound of an office. So you can hear a phone ringing in the distance. There's the sound of 2 or 3 different crowds of people talking sped up. And then there's also a series of sort of random whooshes to represent the people flying back and forth. And there's one specific whoosh to represent the woman who comes to his desk and then goes away.
This is the editing bays right here.
And so that sort of actually happened as a happy accident. I just mixed in one of the whooshes a little bit too loud, but then realized if I nudged it a little bit to the right, I could get it to connect with that woman coming to his desk and then speeding off.
So I feel like you just touched on something pretty important. I mean, you said that like your mind wants to connect what you're hearing to what you're seeing,
Yeah.
and like I've definitely found that to be true. Like even sometimes just syncing sound between like what people are saying. If the sync is off a little bit, it might take a while to even notice because you just I don't know. Or you could even replace a voice, and sometimes you would think that they're perfectly matching. So that's kind of funny. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great YouTube series on this. If you just like, it's more funny, is Bad Lip Sync, where they literally take video clips of famous people. So they'll take clips of President Biden, they'll take clips of celebrities, and they'll basically dub over with totally new lines of dialogue, but it lip syncs to the current videos. And your brain sort of wants to match those words to those faces, even though they're totally disconnected, because it matches the lip sync. And so I know when I'm working on sound design, I'm personally always striving for that moment where things click into place. And it's kind of amazing when it works well. It's really frustrating when you're almost there, but not quite. But going on the idea of layered sound, let's revisit some of these sound effects from the beginning. So the T-Rex roar in Jurassic Park is actually made up of at least 4 different animals. There's probably a few other things in there too, but mostly is an alligator gurgle, a tiger snarl, a baby elephant, and a Jack Russell Terrier, which was actually the sound designer's dog. So it's not always the types of animals that you'd, because like I think a tiger for a T-Rex, that makes a lot of sense. That seems like a pretty obvious choice. But the Jack Russell Terrier, I think, is what gives a lot of that T-Rex its character, like the sound design of that T-Rex, its character in the movie. However, it's not always animals that get animal sound effects like we talked about earlier. So the TIE fighter in Star Wars is actually made up of an elephant roar combined with a car driving on wet pavement. And so by taking that animal sound, you sort of have made it an unfamiliar sound that's scary and sounds threatening. I think they also slowed the elephant down a little bit, if I remember right. But like we were talking about earlier, animals are a great way to give mechanical objects a lot of character. And that's a quick way to also sort of alter the feel, because if you pick sort of an animal that's being hostile, you can make your mechanical sound effect very scary. If you pick an animal that's being friendly, you can make your mechanical sound effect sound friendlier to your audience. The other way that we can try to get our sounds to fit right is manipulating different aspects. And one of the quickest, or one of the easiest, I think, to understand is adjusting pitch. And this is a great way to sort of take your sound effect, and if it doesn't feel right at first, try manipulating the pitch to see if that will get it to sound right for you. You can take something and lower the pitch, which generally makes the object feel like heavier. You also can use this for slow-mo. A lot of slow-mo, they sort of dip down a pitch in pitch. If you raise the pitch, it makes it feel faster, or you can make an object seem lighter. So for example, here's a beer bottle breaking. If we lower the pitch and slow it down, it sounds like this, like a much bigger object shattering. And if we raise the pitch, it sounds like a really tiny object breaking. And so when you're trying to match sort of a sound to an object on screen, this is a great way. If it just is a little bit off, try messing around with the pitch. This is also really good. A classic way of messing with voices. If you lower the pitch of somebody's voice, they sound like they have a dark and scary demon voice. If you raise the pitch, they sound more like a chipmunk or a cartoon character. For finding sound effects, there are a lot of great sources online. Two great free ones that I use a lot are the YouTube audio library and freesound.org. One note on both of those, though, you should be very careful about the rights issues with sounds you find online. Sound effects are people's intellectual property. And so you do just have to be aware, especially if you're using them for a paid project, what your rights are when it comes to the sound effect. Now, the YouTube audio library has a lot of public domain sound effects that you can use freely in any project, commercial or not. Freesound.org, you can search by license. You can choose public domain, attribution only, and then a variety of other Creative Commons licenses. Another way, if you want to just be absolutely sure you have the rights to a sound, are to pay for a sound effects library and check the documents with that, that come with that, or to record your own sound effects. Oh, sorry, Chloe, I'm just seeing the question about the terrier. For the Terrier, he basically used the growls and he pitched those growls down several octaves. And then the classic one is when there's a guy sitting on a toilet who gets eaten by the Tyrannosaurus, and the T-Rex bites him and then is swinging him from side to side. That's like 90% terrier. It's literally the sound of his terrier chewing on it, like biting on a chew toy and swinging it around. So let's talk a little bit about recording your own sound effects. One thing that I would encourage you all to do is never let not having gear stop you from working on films. If you have a phone, you have an audio recorder. I will say, probably get a different sound recording app than voice memos. Voice memos, you don't have control over like the sample rate or some of the other technical specs. And so that can be a little bit of an issue. It's better than nothing, but I would recommend getting a specific sound recording app. There's a lot available for free on the Apple Store. Mine that I use on my phone is called Voice Record 7, which I'm pretty sure is free. And I'm sure there's free versions on Android as well. Another quick trick that you can use is using your camera's on-camera microphone. So like if you have a camera, that camera probably has microphones on it. The big thing is just get close to your sound source. One of the best tricks for recording high quality sound is just get your recorder close to your source. So after you've filmed the scene, you can go up and literally hold the camera right next to somebody washing dishes in a sink or opening and closing a door, and you've got that sound now recorded onto your camera card. If you do have the ability to get one of these, though, a pocket audio recorder like this is really awesome. They're pretty cheap. I try to carry one of these on me at all times because you never know when you're going to run into an interesting sound that you want to gather. I will say, it took me more years than it should have to figure this out. Do keep a log of what you record, because it's really easy to lose track of what you recorded something on or where you recorded something. So I use the Notes app on my phone now, and I have a running sound effects log of what recorder did I use to record it, where did I record the sound, what is the actual sound. And then finally, I'd encourage you to listen to the world around you, because there's interesting sounds all around you in the world. So to sort of sum up everything, sound effects come in several different flavors. Sound is emotional. It has a feeling, and what you want to do as a sound designer is get it to feel right for your story. And on that note, sound design should be unique to your story. I would say don't just use generic sound effects. Build something that only your story would need, through layering sound, through adjusting pitch, through editing the sounds. And finally, good sounds are all around us. They're waiting to be discovered or created. There's all kinds of creative ways to use sound to tell a story. And finally, some additional resources if you'd like to know more about sound design. In-Depth Sound Design is a great Instagram channel. They break down sound effects. There's several clips that are where they'll break apart a 1-minute scene and they'll play through sort of each of the layers. They'll play through the Foley layer, the ambience layer, the design sound effects, the character voices, and you can literally listen to each of those layers on its own. They also do some longer form videos that are like 40 minutes where they have interviews with sound designers about what their process was. The Importance of Sound by Pony Smasher. This was a really inspiring video to me about his process as an independent YouTube filmmaker and how important sound design is to his horror shorts. But also it's a great, even if you're not into horror or science fiction movies, it's a great breakdown of just how to think about sound and where to get creative sounds from. That whole TED Talk, The Beautiful Lies of Sound Design, is worth a watch. It's about 18 minutes long. Like it'll just get you, I think, into that mindset that a good sound designer has. And then there's 20,000 Hertz, which has breakdowns. They do, I think they did an entire episode about the T-Rex roar from Jurassic Park. They also did a really good one where they do an interview with Ben Burtt, the sound designer of Star Wars, which is how I learned about the TIE fighter being made up of an elephant sound and the car on wet pavement. And finally, please feel free to email me and reach out to me at ted.hogeman@gmail.com or at orangelineaudio@gmail.com if you have questions or just want to talk about filmmaking. And with that, let's kick it to questions and Q&A.
Great TED Talk.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you
you.
so much, Ted. Yeah, so feel free to put questions either in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll just alternate between chat and raised hands.
So Professor Zuber asked, how do you use silence? And that is an excellent question. Because that's actually, I think, an underappreciated aspect of sound design is making things is when to be quiet and when to go big. I know for horror movies, one of the classic tricks is when you're doing sound design for a horror movie, right before you want to do a big scary moment, see if you can basically have most of the other sounds drop away, make things quiet, because people get nervous when it's quiet. And that's a great way to suddenly sort of, I mean, there's the classic jump scare where something really loud happens after a moment of quiet, and that contrast can be really frightening. But also, I think one thing that's neat with using silence is sometimes it lets you appreciate the smaller sounds in a scene. So if a character is sort of lonely, or if a character is pensive or thinking, just sort of having most of the rest of the world drop away and just having sort of one or two sound effects highlighted, like the sound of their footsteps on a lonely road, or the sounds of just them fiddling on a countertop, sort of cutting out most of the world and just being focused on those little subtle sounds. Any other questions? Well, I guess I'd also like to ask, oh, here we go, Ashley. So yeah, why are certain sounds like baby noises or cats yowling reused constantly in movies? So some of this is a little bit of sound designers being cute. I think sound designers have certain sounds that basically they get used over and over again, and so they like to include them as Easter eggs. A lot of these also come from, like, there used to be, it's changed a lot in the last 20 years. It used to be that sort of each of the main studios had their library of sounds that they had the rights to, so they would show up in like their movies. And so that's why you hear the same sound over and over again, is because they were all drawing from a limited pool. This is one reason why I encourage you to make sounds your own by combining them with something else. Because otherwise, yeah, you do start to sort of recognize that, oh, that's the same sound from like that movie and that movie and that movie and that movie. It's a combination of the two things. Basically, drawing from a limited pool that, like, it was your studio had access to that sound library, so that's the sound that you used. And then now it's definitely become, I think, a way of paying homage to past movies. So like the Wilhelm scream is like a classic Easter egg sound that shows up over and over again. So yeah, so Chris Corcalo is asking, on a bigger project, how do you collaborate with other sound personnel, the composer, etc.? Do you access their preliminary files, or do you work without them completely? It's a little tricky. Generally, I sort of go and do the sound design for the movie, and then after that process is mostly done, I get the composer's mostly done files, and then basically at that point, we work together with the director to balance everything. A big thing is sort of the director is the main person who makes those final decisions. because ultimately it's the director. We're sort of talking about like what feels right. What feels right is subjective. This is why it's really important to have a director who takes charge, is because the director, it's that the director's subjective opinion that sort of wins out in the end. So I worked on Kringle Time. The director was Matt Lucas, and I worked with the composer Pablo. We're actually still working on that process this week of balancing the score versus the sound design. And so Pablo sent Matt his music files. I've sent Matt my sound files. Matt's balancing them to sort of get the feel that feels right to him for the movie. It'd be great if I'd like to work on projects where we collaborate more. I mean, I will say both Pablo, the composer, and Matt have been great collaborators on Kringle Time. And on a much bigger project, you actually are totally split. Your sound department is actually split between the sound designer who makes sound effects, your sound editor who picks the sound effects that should go in the movie, and then you have a sound mixer who mixes those sound effects. And so there's even more people involved because larger movies tend to be much more complicated. And so those people all when those people all have to like talk to each other, make sure they're sort of giving each other what they need to get the job done. So it does, sound design can be a very collaborative process. Any other questions?
I have one question. At what point in the process do you kind of come in? Do you get the screenplay right away and you're already going through it, looking for what sounds you might contribute, or is it more just in post-production?
So I come from the independent film world. So again, take what I say with a grain of salt. So with Kringle Time, it was weird because I actually got the script in advance because I know the screenwriter Zan, who's also a William and Mary alum, Zan Gillies, class of 2009. I actually did the production sound for that movie as well. And so I sort of knew at every step of the process. I didn't actually expect to be doing the post sound until last year, right when we were going into lockdown. I got an email from the director being like, hey, since we're all in lockdown, do you want to work on the sound design for this film now? And I said, yes. Generally, I think a lot of sound designers you sort of get the project after it's been edited. A lot of times directors aren't necessarily thinking about the sound design until after the movie is picture locked. So they've worked on editing the movie. Everything should basically sort of as it should be, but the sound isn't necessarily mixed yet. There's no sound effects there yet, except maybe some very basic ones. So the director could sort of test timing. And then as the sound designer, I'm coming into this sort of already finished product and trying to figure out what feels right for it in collaboration with the director. Chloe Allen asked, what has been your favorite or most surprising sound you've made? Okay, I was just thinking about this. Favorite sound. I feel like I should have a better answer for this. Oh no, I have one. So actually on the GFF Film Festival, I have a short film called What's Out There, and there is a little rubber band stinger. It's literally the sound of rubber bands played across Tupperware, just sort of plucked at random. And the reason I love that sound so much is in X-Files episodes in the 90s, there was this specific sort of tinkling sound effect they would play whenever alien stuff was happening on screen. They was sort of like, I can't do it with my voice, but that's a bad imitation of it. And I love that sound effect. It's one of my favorite sound effects, but I could never figure out how to recreate it. And then at one point, my fiance came back from from Eastern Market with a carton of eggs that had these red rubber bands on them. And I noticed that she was just sort of fiddling with them, that they were making something that was almost exactly that sound. And so I got really excited to include that in a short film last year. All right, so Bob Abbott asks, much foliage from organic material, bacon sizzle, cornstarch for ice, leaves rustling, but how do you realistically portray a mechanical space scene where the scene lacks organic materials? I know for me doing spaceships in movies, well, first off, the good one is a bed of sort of this, I call it the space sound. And actually you can get it by just holding a microphone like up against your throat. And you get this low drone that just sort of, if you sort of place it in the right spot of your neck, you sort of get this low boom, boom, along with a generic like low frequency buzz. I actually really love that as like a space sound effect. You can get it from a sound library as well. There's all kinds of drones. A classic one that's been super useful is if you have an old school DVD player that actually spits out, that doesn't, not just like a slot that you stick the DVD in, but where there's actually a tray that comes out, recording the gears of that moving in and out can give you a lot of good mechanical whirring sounds. A big one also though is just like, there are lots of great sound libraries out there. And so downloading sounds from like freesound.org or the YouTube audio library, and then pitch shifting them to be what you want. There's tons of really good like science fiction sound effects libraries. And like I said before, I think if you sort of take those, but then layer them with some sounds that you've recorded, you can make stuff that is your own for your project. The other thing is if you want just like weird, if you're trying to sort of make something more like an ambient track for a space station or a spaceship, taking like an industrial sound and then slowing it down to like 10% or 25%, you can get some really sort of alien sounds from fairly mundane recordings with that. Okay, so the sound of ears ringing, yeah. That I think is just a 1200 hertz tone. So literally what you do is you'd go to like a tone generator and set it to around 1200 hertz. Because literally all that is it's the sound of like one frequency being burned out in your ears is what that ringing in your ears is. And so you basically just want to pick most audio editors, editing applications have something called a tone generator. If you just search for tone, you'll probably find, I know Audacity has that, and I believe Adobe Audition has that as well. And you just basically want to play a tone at a specific pitch. So, and pitch goes from 20 hertz all the way up to 20,000 hertz is the range of human hearing. All right, well, thank you all for coming to the workshop today. It was really great talking to you. And if you'd like to talk more about filmmaking in general or sound design, please hit me up. I love talking about this stuff. So, and I love finding new people to collaborate with. So please feel free to like hit me up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ted.